innovation and workshop briefings. We're going to go right into the second one and then take a break after that. The second one is Professor Cass's group on the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership Act.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gowri, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership Act and how we can use this legislation to revitalize one of New England's most significant waterways, the Connecticut River. So this river runs across 5 states in New England, namely New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. It sustains industries like fishing, tourism, and agriculture, and provides drinking water to nearly 5 million people. It's also a cornerstone of American heritage, having provided resources for indigenous communities and powering the American Industrial Revolution. But this development came at a significant cost, significant environmental cost. Today, the river suffers from urban, industrial, and agricultural sources of pollution. Heavy metal contamination, PFAS contamination, and sewage concerns in the river have compromised the quality of drinking water and also compromised recreational abilities for residents around the river. But it's not just about the human impact. There's also many creatures that call this river home as well. And changes in water chemistry due to pollution and changes in hydrology due to climate change have made the watershed's habitat inaccessible to native species like the river herring, the shad, eel, and the sea lamprey, and endangered species like the yellow lamp mussel and the short-nosed sturgeon. But it's not all bad. There is a strong foundation of ongoing efforts by local organizations all across the river. The pictures that you see on this slide are of lobbying for better policy, of tree plantation efforts, and river restoration efforts carried out by local organizations like the River Alliance of Connecticut, the Nature Conservancy, and the Connecticut River Conservancy. And there are many more such organizations carrying on efforts across the 5 states of the watershed. Here's the catch, however. Coordinating time, money, and resources across all of these different organizations is an incredible challenge, and therefore is unable to effectively address the problems of environmental degradation, economic loss, and that's where these local efforts are falling short. So we need a concerted effort amongst all stakeholders to come together in order to be able to restore this watershed. Enter the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership Act. This isn't just another conservation effort, but it's a targeted effort to bring together multiple stakeholders to address these social, environmental, and economic problems head-on. With an expected program budget of $14 million, this bill is going to create a partnership program made of states, federal agencies, local governments, and nonprofits in order to promote these conservation efforts. And it's also going to set up a grant program to fund the kind of efforts that you saw on the previous slide that fall under the broad categories of land, water, biodiversity, with a focus on local engagement. The ultimate goal is to foster a sense of interstate collaboration in order to have that cohesive watershed-wide strategy that I was talking about earlier. So let's talk a little bit about our partnership program. It's going to be led by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with members from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, nonprofits focused on conservation, and state and local governments. One thing to note here is the distinction between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Both are agencies created by Congress, but the service is a public agency and the foundation is a private entity that often works in tandem with the service. The foundation, being a private entity, makes it a lot easier for them to be able to negotiate contracts, which makes them perfect to run our grant program. So this grant program is going to be targeted towards nonprofit organizations, different levels of government, and educational institutions, and they're going to be able to apply for 4 main types of grants. We have implementation grants, capacity building grants, planning grants, and research and development grants. As you can tell, implementation grants have been allotted the highest budget in our bill because we want to focus a lot on on-the-ground conservation and restoration work. So we have 3 areas of impact that we're hoping to achieve from this bill. The first of which is ecological restoration, and this would involve funding projects like installing fish ladders so that fish can safely cross dams, and installing riparian buffers to filter out pollutants. The second area of impact is environmental justice, which involves uplifting communities that have been historically underserved and overlooked through targeted funding and community engagement projects. And lastly, we have research and development, which will allow us to identify priority areas in the watershed so that funds can go where they're most needed. Now, I know all of this was a lot of information to take in, so let's go through the process ourselves as part of the River Revive Coalition. So everyone in this room is now part of this nonprofit called the River Revive Coalition. It's a fictional nonprofit applying for a $1 million grant through the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership Act in order to fund a wetland restoration project. The project goal is to restore degraded wetlands, improve water quality, and support local biodiversity in the North Hadley region of the Connecticut River. When the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation receives a grant application like this, it's going to be considering it on 5 primary criteria. The first is how well it addresses conservation and restoration efforts, its feasibility and scalability, the budget and cost effectiveness of the project, the technical merit of those running the program, and last but not least, environmental justice considerations and the impact that the project will have on the local communities. Now, I want to briefly take you back to this slide that I showed you a little bit earlier to show you where our wetland restoration project is going to fit in this scheme. The River Revive Coalition is going to be applying for an implementation grant because the money received from the grant is going to be directly used towards on-the-ground wetland restoration and conservation efforts. So I've talked to you about the program design. Now, how is this program going to be administered? I've said before that it's going to be administered by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, but more specifically, this is going to come under the Northeast Director's Office. So under the Northeast Director, we have a program manager for the Connecticut River, a manager for the Northeast region, and a coordinator for the Northeast region. So these 3 positions are going to make up the grant administration arm of our bill. In order to do so effectively, we need some key performance indicators. So some of ours include ensuring regional equity by making sure that grants are spread equitably across the geographic area of the 5-state watershed. The second is meeting Justice 40 initiative goals. That is, at least 40% of grant funds need to be going to environmental justice communities or serving environmental justice projects. And we also want to gather feedback from applicants on the fairness, clarity, and transparency of our grant application process, since this is the first year that this is going to be happening. We want to make sure that these grants are as accessible as they can be to a variety of people and variety of organizations. So now, assuming that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has approved our grant, the next step would be for the River Revive Coalition to work with the foundation to create a list of key performance indicators for the wetland restoration project itself. Every grant recipient is going to have to develop these key performance indicators, and additional funding is going to be contingent on the project progress from the first installment. Therefore, measuring the percentage of grantees that hit these scheduled project milestones is another incredibly important indicator to measure. So now let's talk a little bit about our project timeline. In months 1 to 3, we're going to establish the program and cover initial recruitment and training. In months 4 to 6, we're going to identify priority areas and disseminate small and medium grants to projects that are shovel-ready. In months 7 to 9, we're going to go over the grant evaluation. And in months 10 to 12, we'll finalize grant contracts and disseminate large and medium project funds. Something to note about this particular project timeline is that funds are being distributed at 2 key junctures, at the end of month 6 and at the end of month 11. This is so that we can establish some early wins in our program and make the case for increased funding in year 2 and onwards. We know that $14 million is not enough to coordinate an entire 5-state watershed restoration plan. And so we want to show the impact that this program has the potential to have so that we can grow the scope of the program in future years. So to cap it all off, this isn't just another drop in the bucket. It's a coordinated effort to restore one of New England's most essential waterways. Through targeted funding, strategic partnerships, and a commitment to inclusivity, We truly believe that the Connecticut River Watershed Partnership Act has the potential to drive meaningful change across ecosystems and across communities. Before I end my presentation, I just want to take a minute to thank my amazing team for all the work they've put in over the last 6 months. And I also want to extend a special thanks to our faculty advisor, Professor Lloyd Cass, for his continued guidance throughout this semester. Thank you so much for your attention, and I would be happy to take any questions now.
First of all, thank you for your beautiful presentation, and I'm very honored to be part of the River Revive Coalition. Talking about your KPIs, one of the things that you mentioned was that you wanted to ensure that approximately 40% of the grant funds go to environmental justice communities. I just wanted to ask, how are you going about identifying those environmental justice communities that you would like those grant funds to go to?
So I'm glad you asked this question because I had also mentioned that one of our key areas of impact is going to be research and development. And we also have targeted research and development grants. So the first couple months of this program is going to be targeted at establishing priority areas in the watershed. And that would also include not just like physically environmental priority areas, but also environmental justice communities that need to be prioritized through grant funding in this bill. So that's essentially how we plan to ensure that, that Justice 40 initiative goal is met.
Thank you.
I guess there and then there. Those would be the two.
First off, great job, Gowri, on your presentation. I just wanted to ask, I know that there's a sort of split that you guys have proposed when it comes to small and medium versus large grants. Which of that split would you prioritize most? Like, can you give an approximation of how much of the grant funds would go towards small and medium projects versus large projects?
So I have a supplementary slide for you. Okay. I guess it's not there. But essentially, we're planning to, so small and medium grants would be grants that are under $1 million, and large grants are grants that would be over $1 million. And so we're mainly planning to prioritize larger grants in terms of the amount of money that goes towards these projects, because a lot of these restoration projects are incredibly expensive and need a lot more funding to go to them. The small and medium grants are going to be targeted at smaller community engagement efforts and things like that that need lesser funding. But as a whole, we're planning to prioritize, we're planning to target more funding towards the large grants.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm also honored to be part of a nonprofit now. So this funding originally comes from the federal government, yes? From
Yes.
Congress? Do you imagine that this bill will be in competition with other conservation bills, potentially, in other parts of the country? Like, say, Congress allocates, say they're going to say, okay, we're going to set this much of our budget for conservation legislation, and then do you think your bill might have to compete with others for that?
That is a possibility, and it's also something that we considered when we were working on Output 4. The main concern, I feel like, more than in competition with other bills, is that when this bill goes to vote in Congress, a lot of other states might have issue with the fact that so much funding is being targeted towards a very localized issue. And therefore other states might not be completely on board with supporting this bill. So that was one of the main issues that we ran into when we were researching for the political context and seeing how the sort of political climate in the United States might affect how and when this bill gets passed.